You know that feeling when your body is screaming at you to stop, like every nerve is on fire, but you still have to keep moving because nobody's coming to save you? That was my life, every single day. And the person responsible for making it that way? She shared my last name. My name is Alana. I was 21 years old when everything finally shattered. Not just my body, though that broke too, but the lie I'd been telling myself for years. The lie that said, she's your sister. She loves you somewhere deep down. Just be patient. Patience almost killed me. Let me take you back. My dad, Preston, is the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back and then apologize it wasn't ironed. He spent over a decade working in mineral mines overseas, brutal, back-breaking work in places most people can't even find on a map. Also, my older sister Vera and I could live comfortably in our big house in Santa Fe. He trusted Vera to hold things down while he was gone, to look after me, to keep the lights on and the fridge full while I finished my degree. That trust? It was the biggest mistake of his life. See, Vera didn't look at me and see a little sister. She looked at me and saw staff. Free, unpaid, always available staff. From the moment Dad's plane would leave the runway, something in her would shift, like a mask slipping off. Suddenly, I wasn't family anymore. I was the girl who scrubbed wine stains out of white carpet at 2 in the morning while she slept upstairs in the master suite like some kind of queen. I cooked. I cleaned. I organized her chaos. I balanced my college textbooks in one hand and a mop in the other, running on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee, and I never said a word about it, not to Dad, not to anyone. Because that's what you do when you love your family, right? You absorb it. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself she'll change. She didn't change. That Friday night, Vera threw one of her infamous parties. 20-something people crammed into our living room, music so loud the neighbors could feel the bass in their floorboards, drinks everywhere, laughter that didn't include me. I stayed invisible, the way she preferred. And when the last guest stumbled out around 3 in the morning, guess who was left standing in a house that looked like a disaster zone? Me. Always me. By early Saturday morning, I was already hauling trash bags and scrubbing sticky floors while Vera slept off her hangover behind a locked bedroom door. My body was running on fumes, my hands were shaking from exhaustion, but there was still a crate of empty glass bottles sitting at the top of the staircase, and I figured, just get it done, Alana. Just finish and you can rest. I never made it to the bottom of those stairs. My foot hit something wet, spilled liquor maybe, or someone's knocked over drink, and the world just tilted. I went down hard, fast. My back slammed against the steps, and I tumbled like a rag doll until my body crashed into the sharp marble edge of a pedestal in the foyer. The pain that exploded through my abdomen wasn't like anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't a bruise, it wasn't a pulled muscle. It was deep, internal, wrong. I lay there on that cold floor, curled up, gasping, staring at the ceiling while the house stayed perfectly silent around me. Vera's phone was off. She'd turned it off so nobody would bother her precious nap. So with hands that could barely grip anything, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The paramedics found me pale, barely conscious, alone in a house that smelled like last night's party. They loaded me into the ambulance. Vera never came downstairs. I don't even know if she heard the sirens. At the hospital, things moved fast. Ruptured spleen, internal bleeding, emergency surgery. Doctors worked on me for hours while I floated somewhere between awake and gone, surrounded by the cold rhythm of machines keeping me alive. When I finally opened my eyes in recovery, the first thing I wanted was my dad's voice. I called him, heard the familiar rumble of mining equipment behind his words, and I lied. Straight to his face. I told him I'd just taken a little tumble, bruised ribs, staying with a friend for a few days. Nothing serious. Why did I lie? Because I loved him too much to scare him from thousands of miles away. And honestly, part of me still believed Vera would step up. That when she found out her sister was in the hospital after emergency surgery, something human inside her would wake up. That hope died about an hour later. My phone buzzed. One message from Vera. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Where are you?" Not even a question mark about the blood I'd left on the foyer floor. She wanted to know where I'd hidden the spare keys to the side gate. Her friends wanted to use the pool. I'm going to let that sit with you for a second. Her little sister had been carried out of the house by paramedics, and she wanted pool access for her friends. When I told her I was recovering from emergency surgery and needed help with the hospital bills, she just stopped replying, ghosted me, like I'd asked her something unreasonable, like I was being dramatic. And that's when it clicked. To Vera, I wasn't a person. I was a tool. And a broken tool doesn't get sympathy. It gets replaced. The next morning, my phone ripped me out of a medicated sleep. I grabbed it thinking maybe, it was Dad. But no. It was Vera. And she wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling to scream at me about a microwave. Apparently, she'd tried to use the kitchen for the first time in months and decided, with absolutely zero logic, that I had sabotaged the microwave before leaving for the hospital. Like I'd planned some kind of appliance revenge while bleeding internally on the foyer floor. Did you break the microwave on purpose so I'd have nothing to eat? You useless girl. Tell the doctor to send you home right now and fix it. I held the phone away from my ear. Her voice was so sharp it felt physical. I tried to explain, I'm on an IV, I can barely sit up, I just had surgery. But she talked right over me. She didn't care. She genuinely, fully, completely did not care. And right in the middle of that nightmare phone call, my best friend Piper walked into the room carrying takeout and water. She stopped cold when she heard Vera's voice screeching through my phone speaker. She set the food down and just stood there, listening. Her face went from confused to disgusted in about 5 seconds flat. I hung up when the pain got too bad. Piper sat on the edge of my bed, looked me dead in the eyes, and said something I wasn't ready to hear. Alana, your father needs to know the truth. All of it. Right now. I shook my head. I told her Dad was under enough pressure, that I didn't want to blow up the family, that maybe things would settle down once I got home. Piper didn't argue. She just sat there, quiet, patient, waiting for me to stop lying to myself. And as the New Mexico sunset bled red through my hospital window that evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was Dad. And this time, I couldn't hold it together anymore. Dad's voice came through the line soft and steady, the way it always did when he was worried but trying not to show it. He said my story about the minor fall hadn't sat right with him, said something in his gut told him I was holding back. He asked me again, gently, carefully, "Sweetheart, what really happened?" And that was it. That one question, asked with that much love from that far away, it broke me wide open. I didn't just cry, I unraveled. Every wall I'd built to keep myself together came crashing down in that sterile hospital room. I sobbed so hard, the nurses glanced through the glass to make sure I was okay. Between ragged, broken breaths, I told him everything. The fall, the surgery, the ruptured spleen, waking up alone, Vera's silence, the text about the pool keys, the microwave call, the accusations, the cruelty, all of it, pouring out of me like poison I'd been swallowing for years. The line went dead silent, not disconnected, just silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your chest and makes the air feel thick. I could hear the faint hum of machinery on his end, but nothing from him, for what felt like forever. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It had dropped low, dangerously low, into a register I had never once heard my father use. Not when he lost contracts, not when he argued with business partners, not ever. This was something else entirely. This was the voice of a man who had just discovered that the daughter he trusted to protect his baby girl had instead thrown her to the wolves. I cannot begin to believe that Vera would do this to you while I'm away. Stay on the line. I am booking the next flight out. I will be there. He didn't ask me to be strong. He didn't tell me to wait it out. He didn't try to explain Vera's behavior away. He just made a promise, and if you knew my father, you'd know his promises were made of iron. I thanked him through my tears. And when I hung up, something inside me shifted. For the first time in days, maybe for the first time in years, I felt like someone was coming for me, not to use me, not to demand something from me, but to stand in front of me and say enough. That feeling lasted about 5 minutes. Because that's exactly how long it took for Vera's name to light up my phone screen again. Not a call this time. A flood of text messages, rapid fire, one after another, each one nastier than the last. She told me she wasn't paying a single cent toward my medical bills. She told me to discharge myself and figure it out with my own savings. She told me if I didn't come home on her timeline, she'd throw every last thing I owned onto the street. Clothes, books, everything. And then came the one that sealed it. If you even think about snitching to Dad, I will make your life in this house a living hell. I stared at that message until the screen blurred. My knuckles went white around the phone. Something cold and clear settled in my chest. Not fear, not sadness, something harder than both. It was the moment I stopped feeling guilty, completely, like a switch flipping off. For years, I had bent myself into impossible shapes trying to keep the peace, trying to protect a bond that only I was holding together. And for what? So she could threaten to throw my things in the dirt while I lay in a hospital bed with staples in my stomach? No. I locked the phone, set it on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I slept without guilt. Because I knew my dad was already on his way, and Vera had no idea what was coming. 2 days crawled by in a fog of painkillers and restless sleep. When the doctor finally signed my discharge papers, I stood near the hospital lobby doors with a small bag, watching the clock, praying for a familiar face. My legs felt like they might give out. Every breath still tugged at the stitches inside me. Vera was nowhere. Not at the hospital. Not on my phone. I tried texting her. Message failed. She had blocked my number. Her own sister, fresh out of surgery. And she blocked me like I was a stranger bothering her on social media. The only person who showed up was Piper. She walked through those sliding doors like a woman on a mission. Didn't ask unnecessary questions. Didn't make a scene. Just took the bag from my shaking hands, marched to the front desk, handled the rest of the paperwork, and guided me to her car like she'd done it 100 times. "Stop checking your phone," she said quietly as she opened the passenger door for me. "She's not coming. So we're going to drive home and deal with this together." I buckled my seatbelt carefully over my stomach, and we pulled onto the highway. Piper tried to keep things light, talked about school, new professors, semester plans, but my mind was somewhere else. Dad hadn't sent a flight update, no itinerary, no text, just silence since that phone call. I didn't know if he'd been delayed, if something went wrong with his travel, if maybe he was stuck on the other side of the world trying to get to me and couldn't. Piper glanced at me in the mirror. "I really hope your dad gets here before Vera does something crazy." I nodded but said nothing. The desert blurred past the window, golden and dry and familiar, and with every mile closer to the house, the knot in my chest pulled tighter. When Piper turned onto the private road leading up to our property, everything inside me went cold. The long stone driveway stretched out ahead of us like a countdown. The house sat at the end of it, big, beautiful, and full of things I dreaded. I gripped the fabric of my sweatpants with both fists, trying to steady myself for whatever waited behind that front door. I stepped out of the car slowly, walked up the path. Each step pulled at something deep in my abdomen, both physical and emotional. The massive wooden door stood in front of me like a dare. And the second I crossed that threshold, the very second my foot hit the foyer tile, Vera's voice hit me like a slap. She was standing in the middle of the living room, finger pointed at my face, eyes blazing with the kind of anger that made no sense directed at someone who could barely stand upright. "What time is it that you're only getting home now? Stop pretending and go make dinner right now." I stood there, frozen, one hand pressed against my operated stomach, the other gripping the door frame just to stay vertical. I looked at her, really looked at her. And I couldn't understand it. I had stitches holding my insides together. I had been cut open and sewn back up and left alone by the one person who was supposed to look after me. And she wanted dinner. Tears came before I could stop them, hot, angry, exhausted tears. Not because I was sad, because I finally understood that my sister would never, ever see me as a person. Not today. Not ever. She took a step toward me, one aggressive, deliberate step, like she was going to grab me by the arm and drag me into the kitchen herself. And then, a shadow moved behind me. A man stepped forward from the open doorway, tall, broad, calm in a way that made the room feel suddenly small. His name was Gideon, my father's most trusted right hand, and he positioned himself between Vera and me like a wall made of stone. "You should be very careful with your words, Miss Vera," he said in a voice so low it vibrated through the floor, "because not everyone in this room is willing to tolerate your behavior." Vera's mouth opened, a reflex ready to snap, but the words never made it out, because from the dark hallway behind her, another figure stepped into the light. Dad. And the look on his face, I will never forget it as long as I live. My father stepped into that living room the way a storm rolls across the desert, slow at first, but carrying something behind it that you know is about to change the landscape forever. His face wasn't red, he wasn't shouting, and honestly, that made it 10 times worse. Because when Preston goes quiet, when his jaw locks and his eyes go still, that's when you know there's no talking your way out of whatever's coming. Vera saw him and the blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. The crystal glass she'd been holding slipped straight through her fingers and exploded against the hardwood floor. Tiny shards scattered everywhere, catching the light like little broken promises, and the sound echoed through the room like a period at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to finish. She knew, in that moment, standing in the middle of the mess she'd created in every possible sense of the word, she knew it was over. But Vera being Vera, she tried anyway. The excuses started pouring out of her like water from a cracked pipe. She was stressed. She'd been overwhelmed managing the house. She misspoke. She didn't mean it like that. It came out wrong. She was just frustrated about the microwave, the stupid, irrelevant microwave, and she'd taken it out on me by accident. Dad didn't blink, didn't move, just raised one hand, palm flat, fingers steady, and the room went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silent, the kind that makes your skin crawl, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat and wish you couldn't. I leaned into Piper. She held me up, literally, while we both watched the woman who had terrorized me for years suddenly shrink to half her size under our father's gaze. It was like watching someone realize mid-jump that there's no net below them. An hour later, we were all seated around the dining table, Vera, me, Piper standing off to the side, Gideon near the doorway with his arms crossed, not threatening, just present, a reminder that nobody was leaving until Dad said so. And then Dad did something I never expected. He pulled out a laptop, connected it to a projector, and lit up the entire dining room wall with bank statements. Exposed, page after page after page of them. Transaction histories going back 12 months, every dollar he'd sent home for bills, groceries, household maintenance, and where it had actually gone. Designer handbags, weekend getaways, restaurant tabs that could feed a family for a month, bottle service at clubs in Albuquerque, a vacation, a whole vacation, that she'd taken last summer while telling Dad the money went toward roof repairs she had been stealing from him, slowly, steadily, shamelessly, while I scrubbed her floors and cooked her meals and held the house together with my bare hands. She was draining our father's hard-earned money like it was her personal ATM. I watched her face as the numbers scrolled across the wall. She went from pale to gray. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. There was no spin she could put on this, no angle, no tearful excuse clever enough to explain away a paper trail that told the whole ugly truth in black and white. But oh, she tried the tears anyway. She leaned forward, eyes glistening on command, and launched into this performance about how everything she did was for me, that she was practicing tough love, that she was teaching me independence so I wouldn't grow up relying on Dad forever, that deep down, every chore, every demand, every screaming phone call, it all came from a place of love. I only wanted her to stop depending on you so much. I love Alana. I've always cared for her in my own way. She reached across the table to grab Dad's hand, and he pulled it away so fast you'd think her fingers were made of fire. Without a word, he clicked to the next slide. And there they were, blown up on the wall in full brightness, every single text message she had sent me from the hospital, the threats, the insults, the promise to throw my things onto the street, the warning not to tell Dad or she'd make my life a living hell. Every word she'd typed, displayed 6 feet tall on a white wall, while she sat 3 feet away trying to convince us she had a heart. Dad pointed at the timestamps, showed the exact hours those messages were sent, cross-referenced them with my surgical records. While doctors were removing my ruptured spleen and stitching me back together, his eldest daughter was threatening to destroy my belongings because I wasn't home to microwave her dinner. Then came the neighbor testimonies. Written statements, actual written statements, from people on our street confirming that they had repeatedly seen me hauling trash, mopping the porch, and cleaning up after Vera's parties at all hours of the night. One neighbor described watching me carry heavy garbage bags to the curb at 5 in the morning, while Vera's bedroom light stayed off until noon. The room was suffocating. Every piece of evidence stacked on top of the last, like bricks in a wall Vera couldn't climb over no matter how hard she clawed. Dad finally spoke, and when he did, his voice shook the room. "Does your twisted version of love involve forcing your freshly operated sister into the kitchen? You are nothing but a monster wearing the face of my daughter." That sentence landed like a freight train. Vera crumbled, not gracefully, not quietly. She slid off her chair onto the hardwood floor and crawled on her knees, toward Dad's chair, sobbing, begging, grabbing at his pant leg like a child who knows they've gone too far to come back from. And the thing that hit me hardest? Just 1 hour earlier, this same woman had been screaming at me to make her dinner while I could barely breathe through surgical pain. Now here she was, on the floor, mascara running, voice cracking, performing the exact kind of vulnerability she had mocked me for showing my entire life. Dad looked down at her, and I watched something close behind his eyes, something that wasn't coming back open. He didn't comfort her, didn't reach down, didn't say it's okay, we'll work through this. He just stared, the way you look at something you once loved but can't recognize anymore. The next morning came quiet and golden, the way only a New Mexico sunrise can. But inside our house, everything had changed permanently. Dad gathered us in the living room one final time. He stood by the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back, and when he spoke, his voice was steady as concrete. He was cutting Vera off. Completely. No more monthly allowance. No more access to his accounts. No more safety net. She was to pack her things and leave the house immediately. Not next week, not tomorrow. Now. He had already contacted his attorney. Her name was being removed from his will. Every legal document that once connected her to his estate was being rewritten as if she had never existed in it, and the house, this big, beautiful house that she had treated like her personal playground, was being transferred into my name. Vera dropped to her knees again, begging, promising, swearing she'd change. But Dad simply nodded at Gideon, who stepped forward, gently but firmly guided her toward the front door, and handed her the designer luggage she had bought with stolen money. I stood by the window and watched her drag those heavy suitcases down the long stone driveway. Her heels clicked against the pavement, getting softer and softer, until they disappeared entirely, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no sadness, just a deep, bone-level stillness. Like my body finally understood that the danger was gone and it was okay to stop bracing for impact. That afternoon, I packed 2 suitcases of my own, but mine weren't filled with designer clothes, just essentials. Books, a few photos, the kind of things you grab when you're not running away from something but walking toward something better. I had decided to leave Santa Fe with Dad, to go wherever his work took him and start over somewhere clean. Somewhere Vera's voice couldn't reach me through walls or phone screens or guilt. Piper drove us to the airport a few days later. She hugged me at the departure gate, carefully, gently, the way you hold someone who's still healing, and whispered something I'll carry with me forever. "You were never the weak one, Alana. You were the only strong one in that house. Don't you ever forget that." Walking through the terminal beside my father felt like surfacing after being held underwater for years. Every step felt lighter than the last. Every breath came a little easier. And when the plane engines roared to life and lifted us above the desert, above the red clay and the dust and the house that had been my prison disguised as a home, I pressed my forehead against the cold window and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it tasted like. Hope. Here's what I need you to understand. Because this story isn't really about a microwave or a dinner that never got cooked. It's about what happens when someone decides that sharing your blood gives them the right to bleed you dry. It's about the lie we tell ourselves, that family gets unlimited chances, that loyalty means silence, that keeping the peace is more important than keeping yourself whole. It's not. Your worth is not measured by how much suffering you can absorb without complaining. And the people who love you, truly love you, will never ask you to prove it by destroying yourself for their comfort. If you're reading this and something inside you is nodding, if there's a Vera in your life wearing a mask of family while treating you like you're disposable, hear me when I say this. You are allowed to speak up. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose yourself without apology. Because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't enduring the pain. It's finally refusing to. If this story made you feel something real, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell me in the comments, would you have made that phone call to Dad from the hospital bed? I want to hear your truth.